It's one thing to hear a bad story on the news. It's another thing to walk into the cold and realize the bad story is wearing your daughter's face. The night I found them, the air had that sharp bite that makes your lungs feel smaller. The kind of night where metal turns cruel and the wind makes every parking lot light sound like a warning. I had just flown back from a work consult and all I wanted was my own bed and a quiet house. Instead, I ended up standing in a long-term parking lot, staring at a vehicle I recognized like a scar. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. My name is Martin Keene. I am 67 years old. I've spent most of my life building things that don't fall down. Businesses, crews, reputations. I used to think I could spot trouble from a mile away. I was wrong about the kind that comes dressed as family. The SUV was old enough to have seen better winters, and it sat tucked behind a concrete pillar like it was trying to disappear. The windows were fogged from the inside. A towel had been wedged along the bottom edge of the driver's window like someone was fighting drafts with whatever they could find. I stepped closer, my boots crunching on frozen gravel. Then I saw the small shapes in the back seat. 2 children, curled together under a thin blanket. Their cheeks were red, their mouths moving as they breathed, and my stomach dropped so hard I felt it in my knees. I didn't think. I acted. I knocked on the glass harder than I meant to. The driver's seat shifted. A figure jerked upright like she'd been hit by lightning. For a second, panic filled the cabin. Then the overhead light flickered on and I saw her face. My daughter. She stared at me with eyes that didn't belong to her, wide, hollow, trained to expect danger. She cracked the window just an inch. "Dad?" she whispered like the word hurt. I pulled the door open. Stale air rushed out. Cold sweat, fast food wrappers, and fear. The engine was off to save gas. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the steering wheel. "What are you doing here?" I demanded. The question came out too loud, too sharp, because the part of me that loved her was trying not to break. She swallowed hard. "Please, don't get mad, just don't yell." The children stirred. One of them lifted his head and squinted at me, confused. The other kept sleeping like exhaustion had pulled him under. I leaned in and unlatched the back door. "Get out," I said, gentler now. "All of you, right now." My daughter hesitated. "I can't, he'll—" "Who?" I asked, her throat bobbed. "My husband." That was when I saw it. Not just tiredness, not just stress. A bruise along her wrist, faint but real, like someone had grabbed too hard, and a phone mount on the dashboard with no phone in it, like she was afraid to keep one. She climbed out slowly, shutting the door behind her like it was a secret. "I didn't want you to see me like this," she said. "I don't care what you look like," I snapped. "I care that my grandkids are freezing in a parking lot." She flinched at my tone. I softened again, fighting myself. "Talk to me. Now." Her eyes darted around the lot as if she expected someone to appear out of the dark. "He left," she said finally. "He walked out and took everything. The accounts, the lease, even my keys. And then he told me if I tried to come to you or go to the police or even tell my friends, he'd ruin me." "Ruin you how?" I asked, my voice dropping. She stared at the ground. "He has things. Documents. Messages. Something that could make it look like I did something illegal. Like I'm the one who'd lose the kids." My blood went cold in a way the weather couldn't explain. "How long?" I asked. She didn't answer at first. I looked past her into the back seat, at the small bodies under that thin blanket, and I already knew the number would hurt. Her lips trembled. 3 nights. 3 nights. I felt something old wake up inside me, a part of me I hadn't used in years. "Get the kids," I said. "Grab whatever you can carry, leave the rest." "Dad, you don't understand," she whispered. "He'll find us." I stepped closer until she had to look at me. "I understand enough," I said, "and I'm done letting you be scared in the dark." I guided her to my truck, opened the doors, and turned the heat on full blast. The kids climbed in like they were walking into heaven. One of them held his hands to the vents and sighed, eyes half closed. My daughter stood outside the passenger door, staring at the warmth like she didn't deserve it. I put a hand on her shoulder. "You're coming home," I said. "Tonight." Her eyes filled. "And if he comes after us?" I looked out at the parking lot lights, the empty rows, the hiding places, the cold. "Then he picked the wrong family," I said, "because somewhere out there was a man who thought he could blackmail my daughter into silence." and he hadn't met the man who raised her. I thought I was rescuing my daughter from a bad marriage until I saw the first proof that her husband hadn't just abandoned them. He had planned this like a trap. I didn't sleep that night. Not because the house was loud, it wasn't. The kids were out cold within minutes of warmth and food. My daughter showered and sat wrapped in one of her old sweaters, staring at nothing like she was afraid if she blinked too long, reality would rearrange itself again. I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote one word at the top. Why? Why she hadn't called me. Why she'd stayed in that car. Why a grown woman with children would choose cold and hunger over help. By morning I had answers. Her husband didn't just leave. He erased himself with intent. He drained the joint accounts first. Not all at once. Small transfers spread over weeks. Enough that the bank wouldn't flag it until it was too late. Then he stopped paying rent. Let the eviction notice land in her name. Let the landlord believe she'd mismanaged everything. Then came the paperwork. He filed documents claiming she'd taken loans without his consent. Forged signatures, clean copies. The kind that look real unless you know where to look. He claimed she was unstable, emotionally volatile, that she'd been forgetful with money, that she posed a risk to the children. He didn't threaten her with violence. He threatened her with credibility. If you tell anyone, he said, I'll finish it. I'll make sure the court believes you're the problem. You won't lose the house. You'll lose the kids. So she stayed quiet. She stayed small. She slept in a car with her children because she believed silence was the only way to keep them safe. I read through everything she brought with her. Screenshots, emails, letters that looked polite on the surface and poisonous underneath. I've negotiated contracts my whole life. I know the smell of leverage. This man didn't panic when his marriage failed. He prepared. I made breakfast for the kids and sent them back to sleep with cartoons and blankets. Then I sat my daughter down and told her something she hadn't heard in weeks. You are not alone, I said, and you are not powerless. She cried then, quietly, the kind of crying that comes from holding your breath for too long. That afternoon I made 3 calls. One to an attorney who owes me more favors than he likes to admit. One to a forensic accountant who specializes in unraveling lies that think they're clever. And one to a friend who used to work family court and knows how quickly false narratives can harden if you let them. We didn't rush. That's the mistake people make when they're angry. We moved carefully. The accountant confirmed what I already suspected. The loans were fake, the signatures traced, the money rerouted through an account my daughter's husband controlled under a business name that didn't exist 6 months ago. The attorney smiled in that slow way professionals do when they realize someone overplayed their hand. He thought fear would keep her quiet, he said. Fear makes people predictable, but evidence changes everything. My daughter asked if she should confront her husband. No, I said immediately. You don't confront someone who's counting on your reaction. Instead, we documented. We gathered bank records, server timestamps, metadata. We mapped timelines until his story collapsed under its own weight. By the end of the week, we knew 2 things for certain. He wasn't just blackmailing her. He was planning to disappear again. And when he did, he intended to leave her holding every legal and financial consequence like a gift wrapped in her name. That was when I understood the real danger, not what he had already done, but what he still intended to do if no one stopped him. My daughter watched me organize documents into folders, color-coded, cross-referenced. She looked at me like she was seeing a different version of her father. I didn't want to ruin your peace, she said quietly. I looked up. Peace built on silence isn't peace. It's surrender. That night, after the kids were asleep, she asked me a question that broke something open. What if he comes here? I didn't hesitate. Then he'll learn the difference between control and authority, because this wasn't about rescuing my daughter anymore. It was about making sure the man who tried to erase her understood that intimidation only works when the other side stays afraid. And we were done being afraid. I thought gathering evidence would be the hard part, until I realized her husband already knew we were watching him. The first sign he knew came in the form of a message that pretended to be polite. It arrived late in the evening after the kids were asleep and my daughter had finally stopped flinching at every sound outside the house. The phone buzzed once on the counter. No name, just a number she hadn't saved. I hear you're staying with your father, the text read. That's probably for the best. We should talk. She stared at the screen like it might bite her. He never texted like this before, she said. He'd call or send voice notes. That's because he's choosing his words now, I replied. People do that when they're aware. Aware meant he knew she wasn't alone anymore. It meant someone had tipped him off, or he'd checked account access logs, or he'd noticed the quiet changes that happen when fear loosens its grip. It didn't matter how. What mattered was what came next. He escalated carefully. Emails followed. Calm, concerned, filled with phrases like, for the sake of the children and let's resolve this privately. Each message carried the same undertone. I still have leverage, and I'm deciding whether to use it. My daughter didn't reply. Silence is a language too. Instead, we kept working. The forensic accountant uncovered something we hadn't even been looking for. The shell business used to funnel the money wasn't just a pass-through. It had filed tax documents, incorrect ones, sloppy ones, the kind that don't hold up under scrutiny. Someone rushed, she said. That usually means panic. Panic makes people careless. 2 days later, a courier arrived with a thick envelope addressed to my daughter. Inside was a letter from an attorney we'd never heard of, outlining claims of financial misconduct, emotional instability, and potential endangerment of minors. The letter ended with a familiar offer. Resolve this quietly or the next step will be unavoidable. My daughter's hands shook as she read it. They're going to take my kids, she whispered. I put my hand over hers. No, they're going to try and fail. That night I called my attorney back. It's time, I said. We didn't go to the police first. Not yet. We filed something quieter. A motion to freeze contested assets. A request for emergency review of the forged loan claims. Enough to stop his forward momentum without tipping him into a full disappearance. The court response came faster than I expected. Too fast. Which told me he'd already been flagged. He showed up 3 days later. Not at the house. He wasn't brave enough for that. At my office, the receptionist buzzed me. There's a man here asking for you by name. Says it's family. I told her to send him in. He looked exactly how men like him always do when they think charm will save them. Well-dressed, relaxed posture, smile ready to deploy. Martin, he said, extending a hand. I appreciate you seeing me. I didn't stand. I didn't shake his hand. You're trespassing, I said calmly. And you have exactly 1 minute. He laughed softly. Let's not make this ugly. You already did, I replied. He leaned forward. Your daughter is confused, emotional. She's misinterpreting things. I can help smooth this over. You forged documents, I said. You drained accounts. You threatened custody to maintain control. His smile tightened. You can't prove intent. I don't need to, I said. I need to prove pattern. That's when his eyes changed. Not anger. Calculation again. The look of someone adjusting strategy. You think you're protecting her, he said, but you're putting her in more danger. I stood then. I raised my daughter, I said quietly. You exploited her. We are not the same. He left without another word. That afternoon, my daughter received a call from her school district. Someone had contacted them claiming she was mentally unfit to pick up her children. That was his mistake. Because now, he'd crossed from manipulation into documented interference. We filed the next morning. Emergency custody protection. Formal fraud allegations. Evidence attached. By the end of the week, his accounts were frozen. By the end of the month, he was answering questions he couldn't charm his way out of. My daughter watched it all unfold with disbelief. I didn't know this was possible, she said one night. It wasn't, I replied, until he forced it to be. But even then, something didn't sit right. Men like him don't fold cleanly. They burn bridges behind them. And as I stared at the latest court notice, I realized something that made my stomach tighten. We hadn't reached his final move yet. Freezing his accounts slowed him down, but it also pushed him into a corner, and desperate people don't retreat quietly. I learned a long time ago that when someone loses control, they don't always lash out first. Sometimes they try to rewrite the story one last time and hope it sticks. That was his next move. The call came from a number I didn't recognize early in the morning before the house was fully awake. I answered it in the kitchen, coffee still cooling in my hand. Mr. Keene, a woman said. Calm. Professional. I'm calling regarding a welfare concern involving your grandchildren. I didn't interrupt. She explained that an anonymous report had been made suggesting my daughter was unstable, emotionally erratic, and being unduly influenced by a controlling parent. There were concerns about the children's safety. A routine visit would be scheduled. Routine. That word is how fear gets delivered in neat packaging. When I hung up, my daughter was standing in the doorway, pale, already knowing. "He did it," she said. "Yes," I replied, "and now he's out of options." We prepared carefully, not frantically, carefully. The attorney walked us through every step of what would happen, what questions would be asked, what documents would be requested, what not to say, what to say only once. We printed timelines. We organized evidence. We set everything out on the dining table like an exhibit, not a defense. When the caseworker arrived, she didn't find chaos. She found order. The children were dressed, fed, calm. The house was warm. Their school records were current, medical records clean. My daughter answered questions clearly, without hesitation, without oversharing. Then we showed the paper trail. The forged loans, the shell business, the threats, the timing. The caseworker's expression shifted slowly, the way it does when a narrative collapses under weight. "I'll be including this in my report," she said. That afternoon my daughter cried, not from fear but from release. "I kept thinking if I stayed quiet it would pass," she said. "I didn't realize silence was what he needed. Silence protects predators. Documentation exposes them." 2 days later he tried again, this time publicly. A mutual acquaintance called to ask if the rumors were true, that my daughter had lost it, that I was controlling her finances, that the children were being hidden. I thanked them for calling and corrected the record calmly. By the end of the week, the whispers stopped spreading outward and started collapsing inward. People asked him questions. He didn't like that. The final confirmation came from the accountant. "He moved funds again," she said, after the freeze, tried to shift money through a secondary account. "That's illegal," I said. "Yes," she replied, "and traceable." The attorney didn't smile this time. He nodded. "We proceed." The formal filing went in the next morning. Fraud, coercion, interference. Each claim supported, cross-referenced, clean. My daughter signed nothing she didn't understand. She spoke to no one without counsel. She stopped explaining herself. Strength isn't volume, it's boundaries. The hearing was scheduled quickly. He didn't show up confident anymore. He sat rigid, jaw clenched, eyes darting whenever documents were mentioned. His attorney whispered too often. The judge asked questions that didn't land softly. When it was over, the ruling was clear. Temporary full custody to my daughter. No financial contact. No direct communication. Formal investigation to proceed. He stood when it ended, looking smaller than I expected. My daughter didn't look at him. Outside the courthouse, she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for months. "I don't feel scared," she said quietly. "I feel done." I nodded. That's what safety feels like. But justice doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in steps. And the last step was one he never anticipated, because the same documents he used to threaten my daughter had now been reviewed by people whose job it was to notice inconsistencies. And those people don't issue warnings. They issue consequences. The call came that evening. The investigation had widened, not just into his finances, but into his professional conduct. And that was when I knew this wasn't going to end with embarrassment. It was going to end with accountability. I thought the court ruling would stop him, until I learned the investigation had uncovered something far bigger than blackmail. The shift from fear to momentum is quiet. There's no drum roll when the balance tips. It happens in the background where paperwork travels faster than rumors and truth begins to accumulate weight. The investigation widened the following week. It didn't come with sirens or headlines. It came with requests, subpoenas, notices sent to addresses that hadn't been used in years. The kind of administrative movement that tells you someone has started pulling threads they don't intend to stop. My daughter watched from the kitchen table as I opened the mail each morning. She didn't ask questions anymore. She trusted the process in a way she hadn't trusted anything since her husband walked out. "I keep waiting for the other shoe," she said once. I nodded. "That's normal. But this time it's not falling on us." The accountant called late one afternoon. He wasn't just moving money, she said. He was masking income. Consulting fees routed through shell entities, payments that don't align with any legitimate service. Whose income? I asked. She paused. His, and someone else's. That was when the story stopped being about leverage inside a marriage and started being about exposure outside it. The investigator assigned to the case requested an interview, not with my daughter, with me. We met in a neutral office with gray walls and chairs that had seen better years. He was direct, not unkind. Your daughter's husband used financial instruments to intimidate her, he said. But he also appears to have used the same structures to avoid reporting income tied to advisory work he performed for third parties. In plain terms? I asked. He threatened her with fabricated debt while hiding his own, he replied. And the overlap isn't subtle. My daughter sat beside me, hands folded, listening, not shaking anymore. What happens now? She asked. Now, he said, we verify intent. Intent is a heavy word. It's the difference between a mistake and a pattern, between negligence and design. He didn't show remorse when they contacted him. He showed irritation, he requested delays, claimed misunderstandings, offered to settle quietly. The same playbook he'd used with my daughter, just scaled up for a larger audience. It didn't work. One evening, my son-in-law's employer called, not to threaten, to ask questions, the kind you don't ask unless you're preparing for answers you won't like. My daughter sat on the couch, knees drawn up, listening to the phone conversation through the open doorway. When it ended, she looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and relief. They didn't know, she said. No, I replied. People like him rely on that. The formal notice arrived 2 days later. Administrative leave, pending review, professional conduct under examination. He called my daughter that night from a blocked number. She didn't answer. She handed me the phone. The voicemail was calm, controlled, apologetic in the way that avoids responsibility. I think things got out of hand, he said. We can fix this. I'll stop everything if you stop pushing. I deleted it. The kids adjusted faster than I expected. Stability has a way of doing that. School routines, warm meals, predictable mornings. The oldest stopped asking when they were going back. The youngest started leaving toys in places that suggested permanence. One afternoon, my daughter stood in the doorway of the spare room that had become hers. I forgot what it feels like to make plans, she said. You're allowed to remember, I told her. The court date for the next phase was set. Not family court this time. A different building, different stakes. He didn't look at us when we passed in the hallway. That was new. The ruling that followed wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. Permissions granted, access expanded, authority clarified, which meant the investigation wouldn't narrow. It would deepen. On the drive home, my daughter stared out the window for a long time. I used to think standing up would make everything worse, she said, that it would provoke him. And now? I asked. And now I see he was already doing his worst, she replied. I just couldn't see it yet. That night she slept through until morning for the first time since the parking lot. No nightmares, no startled waking, just rest. I sat at the kitchen table and realized something quietly. Without celebration, we weren't reacting anymore. We were finishing. And the man who believed fear would protect him was about to learn that truth doesn't need permission to move forward. I thought the investigation would end with his career, until the final finding revealed how many people he'd been manipulating long before he ever touched my daughter's life. The last meeting took place on a quiet morning, the kind where the sky looks ordinary enough to make you forget how much damage can be uncovered under fluorescent lights and polite language. The investigator didn't waste time. What we found goes back years, he said, sliding a thin folder across the table. Your daughter's husband used the same structure repeatedly. Control through paperwork, pressure through implication, silence through fear. My daughter sat beside me, hands steady now, not clenched, not folded, just resting. He didn't start with me, she said. No, the investigator replied. He practiced before he perfected it. The findings were clear. Misreported income, forged documentation, financial coercion used not just in a marriage but in professional dealings. People who were too embarrassed or afraid to speak, people who thought they were alone. The system doesn't move fast, but when it moves with evidence, it doesn't stop easily. By the end of that week, his professional license was suspended pending final review. Accounts were seized, interviews expanded. The story he'd built around himself collapsed the way all lies eventually do. Quietly, then all at once. He didn't call anymore. He didn't threaten. He vanished from our lives the same way he'd tried to vanish with responsibility. The custody ruling became permanent. Sole custody to my daughter. Supervised contact only if he petitioned and complied. He never did. The day the paperwork arrived, my daughter stood at the kitchen counter and read it twice. "It's over," she said. "Yes," I replied. "It really is." She didn't celebrate. She exhaled. Healing isn't loud. The kids adjusted fully within weeks. New routines replaced old questions. Their laughter returned in pieces, then whole. They stopped flinching at raised voices. They slept through the night. They argued over cereal flavors like normal children do when the world feels safe again. One evening, my daughter asked me something I hadn't expected. "Why didn't you ever give up on me?" she said. I looked at her, at the woman she'd become under pressure and survived. "Because you're my child," I said. "And because silence was never your failure, it was his weapon." She nodded slowly, like that answer settled somewhere deep. As for me, I learned something I wish I'd learned sooner. Strength doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like patience, documentation, letting someone believe their version of reality will hold, right up until it doesn't. I still think about the parking lot sometimes, the fogged windows, the cold, the fear that tried to convince my daughter she had nowhere to go. Fear lies best when it feels urgent. Truth works slower, but it stays. The house is loud again now, not chaotic, alive. Shoes by the door, notes on the fridge, a calendar that actually gets used. I'm 67 years old. I thought my role in life was winding down, simplifying, stepping back. Instead, I learned that sometimes your last job is the most important one. Not to fix everything, but to stand still long enough so someone you love can finally step out of the dark. And if you've been listening this far, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. It helps more than you know.